Hi, I wish you all a very happy Women's Day. In the 2024 movie, the Basharoon or Prime Minister, who was the most feared man in the kingdom, is overpowered by sex slave Zainab by refusing to participate willingly. In the 2023 movie, The Black Book, a bereaved father seeks justice for his son killed in an extrajudicial encounter. And in the final showdown, you have an army of women who show up. And these are not even movies centered around women. And to me, that's quite indicative of female representation in Nollywood. Even in movies that aren't centered around women, you have undeniably strong female characters. And that too very organically and with intention. It's not like they wake up one day and they're like, okay, we'll make He-Man a woman, because I feel that's what happens in Hollywood and I find that hilarious. Anyway, talking about movies that are centered around women, there is Sista, which revolves around a single mother's struggle. There are movies like King of Boys and War, which talk about a woman's rise to power and insatiable hunger for power. There is Lionheart, where a daughter steps up to save her father's business from running into debt. With difficulty comes ease, where a widow has to suddenly deal with the vacuum in her life and financial burdens. There is Oloture, where a journalist goes undercover as a prostitute to uncover the whole mafia. And this list is never ending. New Age Nollywoods, especially the films on streaming giants like Netflix and Prime Video, are all about strong women, or are mostly about strong women. To put things into perspective, on Twitter, as I like to call it, I don't like calling it X, there is this Nollywood Film Club, which are spaces run by Iroko Critic, where Nollywood enthusiasts discuss Nollywood. And the topic for one of the sessions was well-written male characters. And the reason it was male and not female was because finding those are a lot more challenging. And I think that talks for itself. Female representation in Nollywood is not only great in front of the screen, but also behind it. Producers have mostly been women since inception. In this clip, producer Chioma Ude gives us some great insight into how and why.
Nigeria is a fantastic place. So the men were busy scrambling for the positions in government, because there's oil and they're the bosses, and they kept us out. So while they were developing themselves in government, we were sitting down and saying, okay, how do we do trade? How do we do film? How do we do fashion? So, by the time the men woke up, we owned the whole sector. We had gone very far in all of this, and we owned it. We actually owned it.
When you talk about leading female directors in other industries, you would use the word female before directors, but that's not the case with Nollywood. The female directors of Nollywood have outdone their male counterparts in craft and drawing audiences, and even in showcasing versatility. So even in genres which are mostly attributed to men, like say thrillers or action, you have women who have excelled. Kemi Adetiba, Jade Oshiberu, Bearden Stephen, Bolanle Austin Peters, Funke Akindle, Korede Azeez are some directors who deserve a mention. Again, I'm talking from a lens of New Age Nollywood, so I'm sure there are many other great directors who I would have missed out on. Even when it comes to star power, actors like Kende Bankole, Funke Akindle, Genevieve Naji, Mercy Johnson, Bimbo Ademoye, it's a long list. These actors draw audiences more than their male counterparts do. In my chat with Korede Azeez, I did ask her on what makes women stand out in Nollywood and in Nigeria, and she had this to say.
Maybe it's just the way West African women are. And it's nice that there is quite a bit of female representation in this space, even though I keep saying that we need more women in technical roles, because that is the space where you hardly see the women. Right. But I do know that, women, when we want something, we go for it, at least in these parts.
Well, there's definitely something there when you talk about a country where the first and most noteworthy anti-colonial revolt was led by marketplace women, also known as the IBA Women's Revolt against the unfair taxation system. I mean, if you think about it, the empire where the sun never sets was brought to its knees by Nigerian women selling vegetables. Also, talking about women in Nollywood, I had the privilege of chatting with Dr. Jonathan Haynes, who's a professor who's studied Nollywood academically and written, a renowned book on Nollywood. We had a rather interesting chat. We spoke about many things. One thing we spoke about was women and Nigeria, or women and Nollywood, and he gave a very interesting historical context to West African women and economic freedom.
Anyway, this is a pretty common pattern for women to have a considerable degree of economic autonomy within the family. Again, traditionally, everywhere in Nigeria, pretty much everywhere in Africa, there was polygyny. So, multiple wives, each one of whom was kind of running her own operation, within her husband's compound. Each wife would have her own house and cook for herself and her children and raise her own vegetables. They would do some farming together. There were collective tasks, and the husband was expected to provide certain kinds of support. But women always did a lot, and they always went to the market constantly, at least every 4 days in the Igbo context. And very often it was more often than that. So they're selling something there, something they produced, whether it's foodstuffs or something else, and they're buying, and they have a social life. And women also had their own organizations of many kinds in which they could become powerful. But it was not rare for women to actually become quite wealthy as traders, out of their life in the market, and often better off than their husbands. And, they could become kind of major economic players. So that model has always been there. It's not some innovation that comes with Western education or something like that. Colonialism, I mean, this has become a pretty commonplace thing to say, was mostly bad for women because the colonizers were extremely patriarchal themselves.
There's another interesting video done by fellow YouTuber Tito. He also does movie reviews, by the way. In this video, he talks about why there are more female actors in Nollywood as opposed to male actors. And he mentioned this very interesting point.
Contrary to popular perception, acting doesn't pay as much as people think it does in Nigeria. And if you're a man hoping to get married and start a family one day, this could actually be a very contentious issue because you have responsibilities, right? So you consider your options career-wise. You think of better paying or higher paying jobs than acting. Not to say you can't make a decent living from acting, but you'd have to take on lots and lots of roles, and those roles can be hard to come by, even overseas and in developed markets. Now, for women, however, this isn't the case as much. Because women aren't expected to be the breadwinner of the home, they can afford to take a career in acting even though it doesn't pay as much. When we come to Nollywood and the fact that many of our films are actually even targeted more at women, it makes more sense to have women in these films and to even have them on the posters.
Now, all that being said does not mean that Nollywood is ideal for women too, by any stretch. Women being women face the problems that women face anywhere else. In fact, the casting couch does exist. People have gone on to record to say that producers seek sexual favors in returns to roles. And that's something that Tito also mentioned in the video. Also talking about on-screen representation, which I was talking about earlier in the video, what I mentioned at the start is mostly about one, New Age Nollywood, and two, the cream of Nollywood, which is available on top global streaming platforms. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, Nollywood is an ocean. We're talking about 2,500 movies a year. So if we look beyond this niche or before, there is sexism and rampant sexism at it. In fact, talking about Nigeria as a country, I won't be wrong if I say that there is prevalent sexism. It is, in fact, a sexist culture and society, just like any other conservative culture. There are rigid gender roles, there are discriminatory laws, there are practices like female gender mutilation. In fact, Nigeria has one of the lowest female representations in its parliament in the world. We're talking about 4 out of 109 members. That is abysmal. YouTuber Aisha Ayan has a well-researched and well-articulated video on misogyny in Nollywood with a primary focus on the 2000s.
In the 2000s era of Nollywood, women typically had the same archetype. Homemakers, mothers, devoted wife, prostitutes, femme fatales, you name it. I love me a Nollywood baddie, the Genevieve, Omotola, Rita Dominic. But when you take a look back, they were devoid of any kind of nuance or character complexity.
To add to that, in Dr. Jonathan Haynes' book, Nollywood, The Evolution of Nigerian Film Genres, one of the genres in itself is that of scandalous women. Though from there, I would like to believe that Nollywood has taken some big strides, and that too despite the sexism on screen and off it. At least that's the case with the cream of New Age Nollywood. In Dr. Haynes' words, one thing Nollywood has done is it has provided images of women being freer than most Nigerian women are, and that has a liberatory dimension to it. And as they say, life imitates art, so you can't help but appreciate the precedent being set here. And talking about Nollywood as a film industry, the more represented Nollywood shines as an example that is a lot more female represented than any other industry, at least more than any of the top industries. It is way ahead of Hollywood, and Bollywood is a disgrace that shouldn't even be mentioned. Here's looking forward to more amazing female-oriented content from Nollywood. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on it too. Here's wishing you a happy Women's Day again. Thank you. Bye.